The dust was the first thing. It was in her mouth before she woke, a gritty film on her teeth. It was the last thing she saw at night, a brown haze settling on the quilt as the sun died. Clara Mason pushed a strand of sweat-damp hair from her face, her hand leaving a pale streak in the grime on her forehead. The sun was a white-hot coin in a bleached-out sky. It was late August, and the Kansas plains had not seen rain in 57 days. She'd been counting. Every pull on the handles of the old reaper sent a jolt of pain from her raw palms up to her shoulders. The wheat was thin this year, the heads sparse, but it was all she had. It was all that stood between her family and starvation, all that stood between this land and Mr. Silas Croft. Her mule, Bess, let out a low, heaving sigh. The animal's ribs were stark beneath her dusty coat. "Just a little more, old girl," Clara whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Just to the end of the row." The farm was dying. It had been dying since her father coughed his last breath into a bloody handkerchief 2 winters past. Now, it was just her and Thomas was inside, burning with a fever that lapped at him in relentless waves, stealing the last of the softness from his 14-year-old face. The doctor from town had come out 3 days ago, taken her last 2 silver dollars, and left a small bottle of laudanum. "Keep him cool, Miss Mason," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "And pray." Prayer felt like a luxury. Work was all she knew. Work was the only thing that kept the panic from swallowing her whole. The debt notice was tucked behind the flour bin, the paper brittle and cold. Mr. Croft had given her until the end of the harvest. After that, the bank would take it. The farm, the house, the mule, everything. She'd gone to see him last week, swallowing her pride until it tasted like bile. She had put on her only good church dress, a gray wool that made her itch, and walked the 4 miles into town. The First National Bank of Abilene was cool and dark, smelling of oiled wood and old money. Mr. Croft sat behind a desk as wide as her kitchen. He was a thick man, with a watch chain gleaming against his waistcoat and small, damp eyes. "Clara," he'd said, giving her a smile that did not reach those eyes. "A pleasure, but I'm afraid my answer is the same." "Mr. Croft, please. The drought. My brother is sick. I just need more time. The winter wheat will be better." "Time," he'd sighed, steepling his fingers. "Time is money. My dear, your father, God rest his soul, was a good man, but not a good businessman. He took a loan against this drought 3 years running. I can make it work. I just need until spring." "I cannot extend the note." His voice hardened. "The board won't allow it. However," he leaned forward, the smell of bay rum wafting across the desk, "my son, Jesse, has taken an interest in that parcel. He believes the railroad might survey a line through there. He's willing to buy the note from the bank, as a personal favor. You understand?" Clara understood. Jesse Croft, with his slicked-back hair and cruel mouth. He had been the one to start the rumors. He would, of course, Mr. Croft continued, be willing to forgive the debt entirely. He asks only for your consideration. He finds you a handsome woman. Clara, despite your past. The air left her lungs, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. Despite your past, one word, one lie, whispered by a traveling salesman she had turned away. A lie that Jesse Croft had been all too happy to spread until it became gospel. Clara Mason. Tainted, it had cost her the quiet, decent marriage she might have had to the blacksmith's son. It had made her an outcast, a subject of hushed gossip when she bought feed or flour. She had stood up, her hands shaking. "I will pay my father's debt. Mr. Croft, tell your son to stay away from my land, and from me." She had walked out of the bank, her head high, the whispers of the tellers stinging her back. Mrs. Gable, the butcher's wife, had been outside and pulled her shawl tighter, pointedly crossing the street to avoid her. Now, the memory fueled her. It was hotter than the sun. She would not be broken. She would not sell. This land was Mason land. It was her father's grave and her brother's sickbed. She would hold it. Bess stumbled, her knees buckling. The mule let out a pained bray and sank to the dust, the harness traces pulling taut. "No!" Clara cried, dropping the handles. "No! Bess, get up! Please, get up!" She ran to the mule's head, her heart hammering against her ribs. Bess lay on her side, her breath coming in shallow, dust-filled rasps. Her eyes were dull. "Please," Clara begged, pulling uselessly at the harness. You can't do this. I can't do this alone." Tears of pure, hot desperation burned the back of her throat. She sank to her knees beside the mule's head, the sharp, dry stalks of wheat scratching her arms. Exhaustion, heavy and final, settled over her. It was over. She had failed. She had fought the sun, the drought, the fever, and the gossip, and she had lost. She sat there for how long? She didn't know. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the brown landscape in shades of orange and blood. The world was silent, save for Bess's labored breathing and the dry rustle of the ruined crop. Then another sound, the slow, rhythmic fall of hoofs. Clara's head snapped up. Her first instinct was fear. No one came out this far, not for a social call. A lone rider was trouble, a drifter or worse. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her tear-streaked face on her sleeve. He was a silhouette against the setting sun, riding a lean buckskin. He was dusty. That was the first thing she noticed. He was the same color as the road. He wore a brimmed hat, pulled low, casting his face in deep shadow. He stopped his horse a good 20 yards from the fence line, a respectful distance. He didn't ride straight up to her. He sat his horse for a long moment, just looking. At her, at the fallen mule, at the rusted, broken-down reaper. He seemed to be taking in the whole, desperate picture of her life in one quiet glance. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, like stones rattling in a dry creek bed. "Ma'am." Clara's hand instinctively went to the small whittling knife she kept in her belt. She did not touch it, but she felt its presence. "Mr." He nodded at her pump, which stood near the house. "Water, for my horse." It was a request, but his stillness made it feel like a statement. He wasn't begging. Clara hesitated. The pump was close to the house. Thomas was inside, alone and helpless. She was alone. "I got no water to spare for strangers," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. He looked at the mule. "She's done. She's tired," Clara snapped. "Defensive." The man swung down from his horse. It was a single, fluid motion. He was tall, leaner than she'd first thought, all sinew and bone. He moved with a slow, deliberate caution. He kept his hands away from the gun holstered on his hip. He walked to his horse's head and began to unfasten the canteen. "I'm offering to work for it," he said, his back to her. "A day's work for a full canteen and a biscuit, if you have it, and water for my horse." Clara watched him. His clothes were worn. The denim faded to near white at the knees. His boots were scuffed but solid. He was not a town man, and he was not a farmer. He was a man who lived in the saddle. She looked at his hands, which were idly stroking his horse's neck. They were calloused and scarred. They were working hands. She looked at the field, acres of wheat, still standing, waiting. She looked at Bess, who had not moved. She looked at the house, where her brother lay dying. Desperation was a sharper spur than fear. "The bucket's by the trough," she said, her voice flat. "Water your horse. You can have the water in your canteen, and I've got some cornbread." He nodded once, without turning. "And the work?" "The work is right here," she said, gesturing to the field. "If you can fix that reaper, you can start cutting." He turned then. The shadow from his hat still hid his eyes. But she saw a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. He walked past her, giving her a wide berth, and went straight to the reaper. He didn't look at the mule. He didn't look at the house. He knelt in the dust and put his hand on the harvester's wheel. Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She unhitched the harness from the fallen mule, her hands trembling. She would have to try and get Bess to the barn later. She went to the pump. The man, who had not offered his name, knelt by the reaper, studying it like it was a map. He did not ask for help. He did not ask for tools. Clara went inside. The single room of the small farmhouse was stifling. Thomas was asleep, his face pale and slick with sweat. His breath was shallow. She dipped a rag in the water bucket, blessedly cool from the earth, and laid it on his forehead. He didn't stir. Just a little longer. "Thomas," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." She cut a thick slice of cornbread from the skillet, wrapped it in a cloth, and filled a tin cup with water. When she went back outside, the sun was a red smear on the horizon. The man was no longer by the reaper. For a heart-stopping second, she thought he'd gone, or worse, was somewhere he shouldn't be. Then she heard it, a rhythmic tapping of metal on metal, coming from behind the reaper. She walked closer, her boots silent in the thick dust. He was on his knees, working on the large wheel that had wobbled and pulled to the left for the last 2 years. He had taken a piece of leather from his own saddlebag and was shimming it between the axle and the hub, tapping it into place with the butt of his knife. She stood there and watched him. He worked without frustration, his movements economical and precise. He seemed to take no notice of the heat or the fading light, or her. He was simply focused on the task. She cleared her throat. He froze. He didn't jump, just went perfectly still. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet, turning to face her. He was still in shadow. "I brought you this," she said, holding out the cup and the bread. He took them. His fingers brushed hers. His skin was rough and hot from the sun. He stepped back, unwrapped the bread, and ate it in 2 bites, as if he hadn't eaten in days. He drank the water just as fast, then handed the cup back. "It was pulling to the left," he said. It wasn't an explanation. It was a fact. "My father could never fix that wobble." The man just nodded. He walked to the reaper, gave the wheel a hard spin. It turned true. The sound, a low, steady whir instead of the metallic scrape she was used to. He turned to her. "Your mule is done for the day. I'll pull it. You can steer." Clara stared at him. "Pull it? By yourself?" He didn't answer. He just walked to the front of the reaper, took the harness straps Bess had been yoked to, and looped them over his own broad shoulders. He braced himself in the dust. "Ma'am," he said, glancing back at the steering handles. Clara, stunned into silence, grabbed the handles. The man leaned forward, and with a low grunt, the heavy machine lurched into motion. He began to walk, putting one foot in front of the other, pulling the harvester through the dry wheat. The blades began to turn, cutting the stalks with a sound like a great, hungry sigh. They worked like that until the moon was high and bright enough to cast shadows. He did not speak. He did not slow down. He just pulled. Clara steered, her mind blank, her body moving on instinct. They cleared 2 full rows, more than she had cleared in the last 2 days. Finally, he stopped. He unstrapped himself and stood, breathing hard, his shirt soaked through with sweat. "That's enough," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "That's more than a day's work." He nodded, walking over to his horse, which was tied to the fence. He began to check its saddle, his movements stiff. Clara looked at him, then at the barn, then at the small fire he must have built earlier. Now just a bed of coals. He had worked. He had fixed her reaper. He had kept his word. The decency of it, the simple, silent, unasked-for help, made her throat tighten. It was so rare. Men looked at her with pity, or with contempt, or with Jesse Croft's greedy hunger. This man had just looked at the work and done it. Night fell completely, and the heat did not break. Instead, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with a strange, nervous energy. The wind began to pick up. Not a cooling breeze, but a hot, dry gust that rattled the loose boards on the porch. Clara checked on Thomas. His fever was higher. He was muttering in his sleep. She wiped him down again, her hands shaking. She went back outside, standing on the porch, looking at the small figure of the man sitting by his low fire near the barn. He was talking to his horse, his voice a low murmur she couldn't catch, but the sound was soothing. He was alone, just as she was. But his solitude seemed complete, like a shell. Hers felt like an open wound. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, carrying the sharp, electric smell of ozone. A low rumble echoed across the plains. A storm. Clara's blood ran cold. A dry storm. Lightning, with no rain. "The harvest," she said, half to herself. She looked at the field. The wheat he had cut lay in sheaves, drying. A single spark would take it all his work, all her hope. She ran from the porch, grabbing the heavy canvas tarp that was folded by the shed. It was stiff and weighed a ton. She tried to drag it, but the wind caught it, ripping it from her grasp. "No!" she screamed into the wind. A shadow moved. The man was there, suddenly at her side. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed one end of the tarp. She grabbed the other. "Now!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the howl of the wind. They fought the canvas. It was like wrestling a living thing. It snapped and cracked, trying to tear itself free. Dust filled the air, stinging their eyes, choking them. They stumbled over the rows, their hands raw. A flash of lightning illuminated the prairie, stark and white. Clara saw the man's face for the first time. His hat had blown off. He had dark eyes, deep set, and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He was younger than she thought, but his eyes were old. "Tie it!" he shouted. They scrambled for the ropes, the wind tearing at their clothes. Their hands brushed as they fought a knot, a jolt of warm, human contact in the middle of the chaos. It was not gentle, it was desperate. They finally secured the last corner. The wind howled over the covered wheat, but it was safe. They both stood, panting, covered in dirt. The wind whipped her hair across her face. He stood with his feet planted, as if daring the storm to take him. "Thank you," she gasped. He just nodded, breathing hard. The storm was closer now. The wind was a solid wall, and the lightning was striking closer to the south ridge. The house felt small, fragile. The barn was sturdy. Clara looked at the barn, then at him. He started to walk back toward his horse, his shoulders slumped with weariness. "Mister!" she called out. He stopped, turned. "It's a bad night," she said, her voice unsteady. She hated the fear she heard in it. You can sleep in the barn. It's dry, it's safer." He looked at her for a long time. He looked at the house, where a single lamp burned in the window. He looked at the sky, which was now lit by near constant, flickering light. He seemed to be weighing something. "I'm fine by my fire, ma'am," he said, his voice low. She looked away, embarrassed, ashamed of her fear, ashamed of asking. "It's not the wind, the lightning," she was babbling. He was quiet for another long moment. She could feel him watching her, and she had the sudden, certain feeling that he saw it. He saw the terror she lived with every night, the fear of being alone, of the fever, of the debt, of the dark. He sighed, a sound that was lost in the wind. He walked to his horse, grabbed his bedroll and saddlebag. "The barn would be fine," he said, his voice curt. "Thank you." He walked past her and disappeared into the dark square of the barn doorway. Clara stood on the porch, her heart hammering from the storm and from something else. She had offered shelter, but he had understood she was asking for it. She lingered at the door, her hand on the latch. "Thank you," she said again, this time to the shadows, for the wheel, for the harvest, for the tarp, for not leaving her to fight the storm alone. A figure emerged from the barn's darkness. He stood just at the edge of the light from the house. He had found his hat. He tipped it to her. His voice was a low, quiet rumble, but she heard it clearly under the wind. "You don't have to finish it alone." He turned and was gone, melting back into the safety of the barn. Clara was left standing in the doorway, the wind howling around her, his words hanging in the air, heavier and more real than the threat of the storm. The morning broke clear and sharp, the storm having scoured the air, leaving it brittle. The wind was gone, but the heat was already returning, a promise that the relief was only temporary. Clara woke on her cot, her first thought a stab of panic. The harvest. She ran to the porch. The tarp was still in place, a lumpy, dark square in the field, near the barn. The man was already up. He was at the pump, his back to her. Working the handle, his horse, the buckskin, was drinking from the trough. He had stayed. The thought settled on her with a strange weight. He had slept in her barn. He had saved her crop. She dressed, her hands clumsy. She checked on Thomas, whose fever had blessedly broken in the night. He was sleeping, his breathing deeper, the sweat on his face cool. She felt a surge of gratitude so fierce it ached in her. She went outside. The man was coiling his bedroll. He looked up as she approached, his face unreadable in the morning light. The scar on his jaw was a pale, angry line. "Good morning," she said, her voice stiff. "Thank you for last night." He just nodded, tying the roll with a piece of leather. "I'm Clara Mason." She put her hands in the pockets of her apron, a gesture of defense. "My brother inside is Thomas." He stopped his work. He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to weigh her. "Eli," he said, just that, no last name, a name that meant nothing and could belong to anyone. "Well, Mr. Eli." "Just Eli." "Eli, then—" She took a breath. "The day's work you offered is long past done. I'm grateful. I have $2. It's all I have until the harvest sells. But it's yours, and you can take what's left of the cornbread." She hated the charity in her own voice, but she had to. She could not be indebted. Eli finished with his bedroll. He looked at the reaper, standing like a wounded insect in the field. He looked at the rickety fence line, where 3 posts were down. He looked at the barn, where the hinges on the big door were pulling free of the wood. Then he looked at her. "The work's not done," he said. He picked up his canteen. "I'll take more water, though, if you're offering." Clara stared at him. He was not asking for pay. He was not asking for food. He was just staying. "Why?" she asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. He shrugged, turning his gaze to the horizon. "Field needs cutting. Fence needs mending. Man needs to work." He walked past her, past the house, and into the field. He untied the tarp, folded it with the same slow precision he did everything, and laid it aside. He looked at the reaper, then at her. "I can't pull it again," he said, not as an apology, but as a fact. "Not in this heat, and your mule." "Bess," Clara said. "Her name is Bess." "Bess needs a day, at least." He picked up the scythe that had been leaning against the shed, the one her father had used. "This'll be slower, but it'll be quiet." And with that, he began to work. He waded into the wheat, his body moving in a steady, powerful rhythm. The swish and thud of the blade was the only sound, cutting through the morning silence. Clara watched him for a full minute, her heart a confusing mix of relief and fear. A man was working her land, a man who was not her father, not her brother, a stranger. She tried not to grow attached. For the next 3 days, They worked. A strange, silent partnership fell over the farm. Clara would rise, check on Thomas, who was slowly, miraculously, beginning to sit up and ask for water, and then go out. Eli would already be in the field, the line of cut wheat steadily growing. She brought him water at noon, and a piece of whatever she had. He would nod, drink the cup dry, and hand it back, his calloused fingers brushing hers. She would flinch, and he would pretend not to notice. She told herself it was a bargain. His labor for her meager food. It was fair, but she knew it was not. He worked from first light until he could no longer see the stalks in front of him. He was doing the work of 3 men. He was saving her farm, and he asked for nothing. The attachment grew anyway, like a stubborn weed. It was not a soft, girlish feeling. It was a feeling of reliance. She found herself listening for the sound of his scythe. She found herself looking for his shadow by the barn fire at night. She began to sleep through the night, a deep, dreamless sleep she had not known in months. The fear of the dark was gone. He was in the barn. He was close. On the 4th day, she had to go to town. She was out of salt, and Thomas needed more quinine, if she could find any. She hitched up the wagon, but Bess was still too weak. "I'll walk," she told Eli, who was sharpening the scythe blade. He stopped his work. "It's 4 miles. The heat will be high by midday." "I have no choice." He wiped the stone on his pants. "Take my horse. The buckskin." "I can't. He's all you have." "He'll carry you faster than your own 2 feet, and he'll carry you back. I'll stay. Watch your brother. And the farm." He was offering to be trusted. The weight of it settled on her. She looked at him, at his quiet face. He was not a kind man. She thought kindness was soft. He was a solid man. He was a fact, like the ground or the sky. "His name is Shadow," Eli said, walking to the horse and putting a bridle on. "He'll mind you." She rode into Abilene feeling like a thief, sitting astride his saddle. The horse moved with a long, easy gait, and she made the trip in under an hour. The town was a shock. It was loud and dirty and full of people who seemed to have easy, empty lives. She tied Shadow to the rail outside the general store, patting his neck. Mrs. Gable was inside, sorting through bolts of calico. She looked up when Clara entered, and her eyes, small and bright, went from Clara's dusty dress to the window. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. My, that's a fine-looking horse outside, not your father's stock." "It's borrowed," Clara said, walking to the counter. "Borrowed, Mrs." Gable repeated the word, tasting it. "From that hand you've taken on, I hear." Clara froze, her back to the woman. Mr. Henderson said he saw a man working your field, a drifter. He said, living in your barn." She tittered, a dry, nasty sound. "Such a help, I'm sure. A strong, single woman like you, all alone out there. A man in the barn must be a comfort." The word comfort felt vile. The store owner, Mr. Harris, busied himself under the counter, pretending not to listen. "I need a pound of salt, Mr. Harris," Clara said, her voice shaking. "And any quinine you have." "That's what it always starts with. You know, Mrs." Gable continued, stepping closer. "First the barn, then the porch, then the house. Your father would turn in his grave. Clara Mason, first that salesman, and now this vagrant." Clara turned. She did not know what her face looked like, but it made Mrs. Gable take a step back. "You will not speak of my father," Clara said, her voice low and dangerous. "And you will not speak of my farm. You know nothing of my life." She put her coins on the counter, grabbed her small parcels, and walked out, her head high, just as she had from the bank. But this time, The shame was mixed with a hot, protective anger. They were not just talking about her, they were talking about Eli. When she got back, he was at the fence line, digging a new post hole. He didn't ask about her trip. He just nodded at the small bags and took his horse, rubbing the buckskin's nose. That afternoon, she confronted him. She found him by the broken trough, where he was mixing a small bag of cement he must have had in his saddlebag. "You have to go," she said, the words spilling out. He stopped, his trowel halfway to the wood. He looked up at her, his face grimed with sweat and dust. "They're talking in town. They're saying you're staying here." "I am staying here." "You don't understand," she cried, her frustration boiling over. "They're saying things. They're saying you're living with me. They're calling you a vagrant. They're ruining what's left of my name." Eli stood up slowly. He was taller than she was, and he seemed to fill the space. He did not look angry. He looked tired. "Do you want me to go, Clara?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question hung in the hot, still air. She looked at the mended fence, at the growing pile of cut wheat, at the fixed trough. She thought of Thomas, sleeping peacefully inside. She thought of the silence in the house, a silence that was no longer lonely, but just quiet. "No," she whispered, her shoulders slumping. "No, I don't." "Then let them talk," he said. He knelt and went back to his cement. Talk is wind. It doesn't stop the harvest. He kept working. He finished the trough. He fixed the barn door. He took her father's rusty plow and began to turn the earth in the small patch behind the house, preparing it for winter corn. He hauled sacks of cut wheat. He never stopped. And he never asked for a single thing. The nights were the hardest. The shared silence was becoming charged. She would sit on the porch. He would sit by his fire. The space between them, 100 feet of dust, felt as taut as a wire. She knew little about him. She knew he was from somewhere in the east. She knew he did not like to talk about the war. But she had seen the look in his eyes, and she had heard him. Some nights, nightmares. A single, choked word. A name. Maybe. He would cry out, and she would sit up in her cot, her heart pounding, wanting to go to him. But she did not dare. One morning, she found him by the pump, washing. He had been awake for a while, his nightmare driving him from the barn. He was pale. You had a bad night," she said, twisting her apron. He stiffened, his hand stopping on the pump handle. "I'm fine." "You were a soldier," she said, not as a question. He looked at her, and his eyes were cold, dangerous. "Don't," he said. "My father fought at Gettysburg," she offered, trying to find common ground. "I wasn't a soldier," Eli said, his voice flat. "Soldiers wear blue. I was a scout. We wore gray. We wore butternut. We wore whatever kept us from getting seen. We were ghosts." He pumped the water, the splash and creak loud in the quiet. "I lost my brother at Shiloh, but I got lost later. A massacre. Not a battle, just a slaughter. I hid. I played dead for 2 days under my own men." He looked at his hands, as if seeing the blood still on them. "I've been wandering ever since. Never went back. Never will." He picked up the bucket and walked away, his back a rigid wall. He had shared it, and now he was ashamed. That evening, the final blow came. She went to check on Bess. The old mule was lying in her stall. She had not eaten the hay Clara left her. Her breathing was shallow. "Bess?" Clara said, her voice small. She touched the mule's head. It was cool. Bess let out a long, final sigh, a rattling of air, and then was still. Clara sank to her knees in the hay. It was not just a mule. It was the last thing her father had bought. It was the last piece of her old life. It was the final, undeniable proof that she could not make it. The farm was a stone, and it was pulling her under. She put her head on the mule's flank. And for the first time, she did not cry from anger or frustration. She cried from a place so deep and empty it frightened her. She cried for her father, for Thomas, for her ruined name, for the land she was going to lose. She did not hear Eli enter the barn. She only felt his presence, a sudden stillness in the air. She looked up, her face a mess of tears and straw. He was standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the dusk. "She's gone," Clara wept, her voice breaking. "She's gone. It's all gone. Why did you stay? Why are you helping me? It's for nothing. It's all for nothing." She expected him to leave, to walk away from the hysterical, broken woman in the dirt. Instead, he walked forward. He sat down in the hay, not close enough to touch, but close enough to share the space. He just sat. He did not offer words. He did not offer pity. He simply sat, a solid presence in the darkness that was falling. Clara cried until she was empty, her sobs turning into dry, hitched breaths. "It's not fair," she whispered to the floor. "I've worked so hard. My father, he worked so hard. And no one ever comes when I need help. They just talk, or they try to take." Eli was silent for a long time. The barn was full of the smell of hay and the finality of death. Then he moved. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand, not her palm, her wrist. His grip was firm, grounding. His skin was rough against hers. He said nothing. They sat like that. He held her wrist, a human anchor in the dark. The moon rose, casting a pale beam through the barn door. Crickets started their nightly song, and he did not let go. She leaned her head back against the stall, her tears drying, and he just held on. They sat there until the first pale light of dawn crept into the barn, and her breathing was as steady as his. The next days were different. The air was charged, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a simmering awareness. When she mended his shirt, a tear from the fence, she found herself tracing the stitching, her fingers on the coarse fabric that had been against his skin. The act of mended, a simple, domestic task, brought a memory forth, sharp and painful. Mr. Abernathy, the salesman. He had come to the farm, trying to sell her father a new kind of seed. He had eyes like a fox, and he had smelled of cologne. He had told Clara she was a rose blooming in the dust. He had promised her silk dresses in St. Louis. He had come back one night, after her father was asleep, tapping on her window. She had sent him away, her voice sharp, but Jesse Croft had been riding by. He had seen the man leaving. That was all it took. A man, at night, a look, a lie. Her engagement to Matthias, the blacksmith's son, was broken a week later. Matthias had been kind, but he was a soft man. He believed the town over her. Clara jabbed the needle into the denim. Eli was not a soft man. He was not kind. He was real. He had sat with her in the dirt and the dark. He had held her. He had seen her at her absolute worst, and he had not left. The desire was not a sudden thing. It was a slow burn, like an ember in the ash. It was built on the foundation of shared work, of his silent presence, of the safety she felt when he was near. One evening, the heat was unbearable. The sun was a low, molten thing, painting the fields in a deep, burning gold. It was the golden hour, and it was beautiful and terrible. Eli was splitting the last of the wood her father had stacked. He had taken off his shirt. Clara stood on the porch, a cup of water in her hand, and she just watched. He was leaner than she thought, his body a map of taut muscle and sinew, all of it functional. His back was tan and slick with sweat. The scar from his jaw continued down his shoulder. She watched the muscles in his back bunch and release as he swung the axe. The thwack of the blade sinking into the wood, a punctuation to the evening stillness. He was pouring his life, his strength, into her land. He was fighting for it, in a way she never could. He stopped, his chest heaving. He reached down to grab the canteen, and as he turned, he saw her. He froze. His eyes met hers across the yard. He knew she had been watching. She did not look away. She did not blush and run inside. As the tainted Miss Mason should, she held his gaze. The air between them crackled, thick with everything unsaid. His eyes were dark, intense. He did not smile. He just looked at her. And in his gaze, she did not see pity or contempt or even just need. She saw recognition. He saw her. He finally broke the gaze, took a long pull from his canteen, and went back to the wood. Clara went inside, her hands shaking. She put the cup down. She checked on Thomas, who was reading a dime novel. She sat on her cot, but the house was too small. The air was too thick. That night, she could not sleep. The moon was a high silver dollar, flooding the farm with pale light. She heard his horse shift in the barn. She stood. She did not think. She just moved. She walked out of the house, her feet bare in the cool dust. She crossed the yard. The barn door was open. He was not asleep. He was sitting on a hay bale, his back against the wall, his hat on his knee. He was just visible in the shaft of moonlight. He looked up as she approached, but he did not seem surprised. He seemed to have been waiting. She stopped in the doorway. The barn smelled of hay and horse and him. Neither of them spoke. The silence was absolute. She took a step, then another. She walked until she was standing in front of him, close enough to see the way the moonlight caught the silver in his stubble. He looked up at her, his face a mask of shadows and light. She reached out, her hand trembling, and put it on his arm. His skin was warm. The muscle was hard beneath her touch. He closed his eyes. Clara leaned in, slowly, giving him every chance to turn away. He did not move. She put her other hand on his scarred jaw, her thumb tracing the line. Then she kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was slow and aching and hesitant. It tasted of salt and dust and a desperation that matched her own. It was a kiss of gratitude and of need and of a loneliness so deep she thought it would kill her. He did not kiss her back. At first, he was perfectly still, as if taking a blow. Then, with a low sound, his hand came up and gripped her waist, his fingers digging into her, pulling her closer. His other hand tangled in her hair, and he kissed her back. It was a flood, all the unspoken words, all the shared work, all the fear and the hope. It was a kiss that said, "I see you, and I am here." He finally broke away, his breath coming hard. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "You deserve more," he whispered, his voice a rough rasp. "You deserve a whole man, a farmer, not this, not a wandering man." Clara pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. The moonlight was on his face, and she saw the pain there, the ghosts he carried. "You've already given me more," she said, her voice clear and strong in the quiet barn. "You've already given me more than anyone ever did." And she pulled his face back to hers. The quiet of the barn did not last. The kiss, and what followed, was a line drawn in the dust. They had crossed it, but the sun rose, and the world did not change. The heat was still a hammer, the debt was still a noose, and Thomas was still sick. For a week, a new, fragile peace settled. Eli moved from the barn to the porch. He did not ask. He just unrolled his bedroll there one night, a silent guardian against the dark. Clara did not object. His presence was a comfort, a solid, warm thing in the cool night air. Their days were a shared rhythm. He worked the fields, his scythe a whisper through the wheat. She worked the house, tending to Thomas, her needle flashing as she mended their worn clothes. Their words were few, but they no longer needed them. A shared look over a cup of water, the brush of his hand as he took a plate of bread. These were their new language. Thomas had been improving. His fever was a memory. He was sitting up, thin and pale, but his eyes were clear. He had even, 2 days prior, walked to the porch to watch Eli reshoe the buckskin. Shadow. Then, on a Tuesday, the heat broke, but not with rain. A thick, soupy humidity rolled in, choking the air, making every breath a chore. That was the day the fever returned. Clara was boiling linens when she heard the sound, a single, sharp cry from the house. She dropped the wooden spoon and ran, her apron catching on the door. Thomas was not on his cot. He was on the floor, his body rigid, his back arched in a violent spasm. His eyes were rolled back, and a thin line of foam flecked his lips. "No!" Clara screamed, falling to her knees beside him. "No, Thomas! No!" She grabbed him, but he was stone, his limbs locked. The convulsion was terrible, a force that seemed to be tearing her brother apart. "Eli!" she shrieked, her voice a raw sound of pure terror. "Eli!" He was there in an instant, filling the doorway, his chest heaving, the scythe still in his hand. He took in the scene in one dark, comprehensive glance. The boy on the floor, Clara, hysterical, trying to hold him. He dropped the scythe. "Get a wet rag, cool, from the bucket." His voice was not loud, but it cut through her panic. She scrambled to obey. He knelt, his movements sure. He did not try to hold Thomas down. He just turned him on his side, his large, scarred hand protecting the boy's head from the hard wooden floor. The fit passed, leaving Thomas limp, boneless. His skin was on fire. "He's burning," Eli said, his voice grim. He took the rag from her shaking hand and wiped the boy's face. Thomas's breath was a shallow, rapid puff. "It's come back," Clara wept, her hands twisting in her dress. "Oh God, it's come back. The laudanum is gone. The doctor, he has nothing left." "He needs quinine," Eli said. He looked at the boy, then at her. "The doctor in town, does he have it?" "Yes, at the general store. But, Eli, I have no money. I have nothing left." "I don't need money for this." He stood. His face was a hard mask. "No," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "You can't. They'll see you. Mrs. Gable, Jessie Croft. They'll say, they'll—" "He's burning. Clara," Eli said, his voice flat. "He has an hour, maybe 2, then the next fit comes." He was right. She knew he was right. Her fear for him was swallowed by her terror for Thomas. She ran to the old biscuit tin, her hands fumbling. Inside, under the false bottom, was her mother's silver locket. It was the last thing. She had saved it. For what, she never knew. For this. "Take this," she said, pressing it into his hand. "Sell it to Mr. Harris. He'll give you $1 for it. It's enough. Please, just come back." He looked at the locket, his fist closing around it. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Once. He was out the door. She heard the thunder of Shadow's hoofs, a sound of furious retreat. She was alone again. She bathed Thomas's face, her own tears mixing with the water. She prayed, she begged. She made bargains with a God she was no longer sure was listening. She watched the sun creep across the floor, a slow, agonizing measure of time. Abilene was hotter than the farm. The main street was a river of dust and sun. Eli rode Shadow hard, but pulled him to a walk at the edge of town. He was not a fool. He knew what he looked like. A drifter, on a fine horse, in a hurry. That was a man who drew attention. He tied Shadow to the rail outside the general store, his movements deliberate. He kept his hat low, his eyes on the boardwalk. He could feel the stares. The town was quiet, simmering in the midday heat. Mr. Harris, a small, balding man with spectacles, looked up when the bell on the door jingled. "Help you, mister?" Quinine, Eli said, his voice low, and a bottle of laudanum for a fever.
That'll be 75 cents for the quinine. The laudanum's 25. $1.
All told. Eli placed the silver locket on the counter. His hand was steady. Mr. Harris picked it up. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the locket, then at the man. He recognized the piece. He'd seen Clara Mason wear it. He'd heard the talk, so this was the man. $1, Mr. Harris said, his voice cool. He opened his till. Eli pocketed the small bottles. He turned to leave. He was almost there. Well, if it isn't the barn cat, come to town for cream. Eli froze. The voice was slick, arrogant. He turned, slowly. Jesse Croft was standing in the doorway, blocking the light. He was flanked by 2 other men, both with the same soft, cruel look. Jesse was dressed in a fine linen suit, a pearl gray vest, and a string tie. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I was wondering when I'd get a look at you, Jesse said, stepping into the store. He walked around Eli, inspecting him like a livestock. My. Not much to look at, are you? All dust and sweat. I can't imagine what Clara sees in you. Eli said nothing. He just watched him. His body was still, but inside. A cold, familiar thing was uncoiling. Mr. Harris, Jesse said, not taking his eyes off Eli. You're serving this vagrant? He hasn't got 2 cents to rub together. Or has he been paying with farm goods? He paid Mr. Croft, Harris said, his eyes on his ledger. Did he now? Jesse turned his full attention back to Eli. I'm Jesse Croft. My father owns the bank, which means, in about 2 weeks, I'm going to own that patch of dirt you're squatting on. Eli's hand, the left one, clenched at his side. He could feel the small bottles in his pocket. He thought of Thomas. I'm just passing through, Eli said, his voice a low rumble. Oh, I don't think so. Jesse sneered. You're shacking up with her. The whole town knows it. But I guess a man like you can't be picky. You have to take what you can get. Jesse stepped closer, lowering his voice. The smile was gone. But I'm here to tell you, Drifter, that the farm is mine, and the girl, well, she comes with it. So I want you gone. By sundown. She doesn't want you, Eli said. The words were flat. Jesse laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. She doesn't have a choice. She'll learn to want me, but you're just trash, and you're dirtying the goods. He leaned in, his voice a hiss. Tell me, how does she feel? I hear she's spoiled. I hear she's easy. Tell me, Drifter, are you enjoying my spoiled goods? That was it. The old soldier woke up. The world went silent. The dust motes in the air stopped moving. Eli saw the pulse in Jesse's throat. He saw the way his thin lips curled. He felt the phantom weight of the rifle in his hands, the cold steel of the knife at his belt. His nightmares were not memories. They were a place he lived. Eli moved. It was not a punch. It was a shift. His right hand, the scarred one, came up and grabbed the front of Jesse's fine linen suit, twisting it, pulling him forward off his feet. Eli's other hand shot out and slammed Jesse's back against the store's counter. Jars rattled. Jesse let out a choked, terrified gasp. Eli's face was inches from his. The store was silent. Jesse's friends had not even moved. You will not, Eli whispered, and his voice was not his own. It was the voice from the nightmares, the voice of the ghost. You will not say her name, ever, again. Jesse's eyes were wide with terror. He was choking. He was a soft man, a man of words and money. He had never, in his life, been touched by this. This was not a fight. This was a killing. And Eli knew it. He saw the fear in Jesse's eyes, and he saw himself. The man in the mud, the man who hid, the man who survived. The violence that was always just a breath away. He thought of Clara. He thought of the war. He thought of bringing this thing back to her farm. With a low grunt of self-disgust, he shoved Jesse away. Jesse crumpled to the floor, gasping, his suit ruined. Eli turned. Jesse's two friends stepped back, their hands up. They wanted no part of this. Eli looked at them, then at the man on the floor. He straightened his own dusty vest. He adjusted his hat. "He's a sick boy," Eli said, his voice returning. "The fever." He walked out of the store. He did not look back. He unhitched Shadow, swung into the saddle, and rode out of town. The medicine safe, the locket sold, and the rage burning a hole in his gut. When Clara saw him on the ridge, she nearly collapsed with relief. He rode Shadow into the ground, the horse lathered and breathing hard. He swung down before the horse even stopped, and pressed the bottles into her hand. His face was terrible. It was pale, streaked with dust, and his eyes were the ones she had heard in his nightmares. "What happened?" she asked, her hand on his arm. "Later," he bit out. "The boy?" He did not speak again. Clara ran inside and forced the bitter quinine down Thomas's throat. She sat by him, bathing him, praying. Eli did not come in. He did not rest. He went to the field, and he began to work. He did not take the scythe. He took the old, heavy plow, the one Bess could no longer pull. He looped the harness over his own shoulders, the one he had worn that first day, and he began to carve a fire break into the dry earth, separating the harvested wheat from the rest of the prairie. He worked like a man possessed. Clara watched from the window. He was not just working. He was at war. He was fighting Jesse Croft. He was fighting the men in the mud. He was fighting the ghosts. His muscles strained, the sweat pouring off him, his body a single focused engine of rage and grief. He was pulling the plow through the baked, hard earth by sheer, raw will. He worked until the sun went down. He worked until the moon came up. He finished the fire break. Then he went to the wood pile and began to split wood, the thwack of the axe a furious, steady heartbeat in the dark. Thomas's fever broke at 3 a.m. He woke, his eyes clear, and asked for water. Clara cried, her tears washing the dust from his face. She went out to the porch. Eli was sitting on the steps, his head in his hands, the axe at his feet. He was shaking, not from cold, but from sheer exhaustion. He's better," she whispered. "The fever broke. He's sleeping." Eli looked up. His face was gray in the moonlight. "He said," Eli said, his voice hollow, "he called you spoiled goods." Clara closed her eyes. The old, familiar shame washed over her. But this time, it was different. It was mixed with anger. "So you know," she said. "Now you know what they say." "I hit him," Eli said. I almost didn't stop. I almost—" She sat down on the step beside him, not touching, but close. The air was cool. "What did you do?" she asked. "I let him go." They sat in silence for a long time. The farm was safe. Her brother was safe. The harvest was, for now, safe. The next few days, Eli finished it. He worked with a grim, silent efficiency. He hauled the last of the sheaves, stacked them, and covered them. The work was done. The farm was ready. That night, for the first time, Clara brought the stew to the kitchen table and set 2 places. Eli had washed at the pump, his shirt off, and she had seen the new bruises on his knuckles. He came in, hesitant, his hair still wet. He sat at her father's table. It felt strange. It felt right. They ate in silence. The stew was thin, mostly potatoes, but it was hot. Eli's scarred hand was resting on the table. It was clean, but the skin was raw, the knuckles split. Clara looked at it. That hand had saved her brother. It had defended her name. It had held her in the dark. She reached out, slowly, and laid her hand over his. He flinched, a small, sharp movement, but he did not pull away. He just stared at their hands, her, pale and thin, him, dark, scarred, and strong. He looked up at her, his eyes full of the things he couldn't say, the violence, the town, the shame.
"Eli,"
she said, her voice soft but firm.
"You don't scare me. Nothing about you does."
He just stared at her, as if he couldn't understand the words.
"Not the scars,"
she continued, her thumb brushing his split knuckles.
"Not the nightmares. Not what you did in that store.
I am not afraid of you." It was the truth. She had seen the worst of him, the barely contained violence, and she was not afraid. She had been afraid of Jessie Croft, of Mrs. Gable, of the banker, of their words, but not of this. He broke. It was not a sudden thing. It was a slow collapse. He pulled his hand from hers and scrubbed it over his face. A rough, pained gesture. A sound came from his throat, a choked, dry sob. "You should be," he whispered, his voice cracking.
"You should be. You don't know. You don't know what I am."
"Then tell me," she said, her voice unwavering. He looked at her, and his eyes were raw. He was back in the mud. He was back in the war.
I was at Cold Harbor,"
he whispered, the name of the place a curse. "It wasn't a battle. It was a reaping. We were just wheat. Just like this, cut down." He stood up, unable to sit still, and walked to the dark window, his back to her.
"My brother, he was with me, younger. I promised my mother He was just a boy. He liked to draw birds."
He stopped, his hand pressed against the glass. "The ambush. It wasn't. It was later. A patrol. We were scouting. They were everywhere. They came out of the trees. I saw my friend. Samuel. I saw him cut." He choked on the word. "I fell. I wasn't hit. I just fell. Into the mud. A man fell on top of me. Dead. He was heavy." Clara stood, but stayed by the table. She would not stop him.
"I didn't move," he whispered to the glass. "I heard them, the sounds, the finishing. I heard my brother. He called my name. Once. Eli. Just Eli."
His shoulders were shaking.
"And I didn't move. I stayed in the mud. I let the flies. I played dead. For 2 days. I lay under my friend. I listened to my brother. I listened to him die. And I did not move." He was weeping now, silent, terrible tears. "I am not a good man. Clara, I am not a soldier. I am a coward. I am the man who hid." He turned to face her, his face wrecked, exposed. He was waiting for her to turn away, to see him for the monster, the coward. He was... Clara walked to him. She did not say, "You're not a coward." She did not say, "You did what you had to." She did not offer him absolution. She just walked into his arms. She wrapped her own around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. She held him. She held the man who was shaking apart in her kitchen. He was stiff for a moment, shocked. Then, with a low, animal sound of pain, his arms came around her, crushing her to him. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling, and he held on as if she was the only solid thing on earth. They stood like that for a long, long time, in the middle of the small, dark farmhouse. Their love was not just the fire in the barn. It was this. It was the shared, broken and scarred pieces of them, fitting together in the dark. The next morning, the harvest was complete. The wheat was cut, stacked, and safe. They stood on the porch, watching the sun rise. Eli's arm was around her waist, a new, possessive, protective gesture. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. She looked out at the land, at the golden stacks of wheat, and for the first time, she did not see a debt. She did not see a failure. For the first time. In a long time.
Clara Mason allowed herself to hope. Hope was a fragile thing, a pale green shoot in a field of ash. For a week, Clara tended it. She and Eli had settled into a life that felt almost normal. He had moved his bedroll to the porch, a silent, steady guardian. She woke to the sound of his movements, the quiet splash of water from the pump, the low murmur of his voice as he checked on Shadow. Thomas was healing. The color was back in his face. His appetite returned. He would sit on the porch steps, his legs still thin, and watch Eli work. He had started to whittle, a piece of wood Eli had given him, and the boy's eyes followed the man with a quiet, profound hero worship.
The harvest was done. The wheat was in sacks, thousands of pounds of it, stacked high inside the barn and along its sheltered eastern wall. It was a physical, tangible thing. It was safety. It was the debt paid. Eli had finished the firebreak, and now he was mending the last of the fences. Clara worked beside him, handing him the tools, her heart so full it ached. He was quiet, but his silence was no longer a wall. It was a space they shared. He would look at her, and his eyes, once so haunted, were clear. He would touch her as he passed, his fingers brushing her arm, a jolt of connection that left her skin humming. This new, soft life made the arrival of Jesse Croft feel like a violation, a snake sliding into a nest. He rode up one afternoon, not on his usual flashy bay, but in a smart, black buggy, driven by his father, Mr. Croft stayed in the seat, his face a mask of cold business. Jesse stepped down, his boots polished, his linen suit impeccable. He was holding a leather satchel. Eli saw him first. He had been on the roof of the porch, fixing a loose shingle. He did not climb down. He just sat, his hammer in his hand, a dark, still figure watching from above. Clara came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She felt Eli's presence above her, a silent weight. "Miss Mason," Jesse said, his voice slick and smooth, all traces of their last encounter erased. He even smiled, a tight, practiced expression. "A fine afternoon." "Mr. Croft, I've come on a matter of business, a final offer. You might say, a gesture of goodwill." He opened his satchel. "My father, given the circumstances of your fine harvest, is willing to be generous." Clara's heart went cold. "What offer?" "We know you're set to pay the note. The harvest looks sufficient." His eyes scanned the brimming barn. "But then what? You'll be penniless again. Another winter, another drought, another sick spell." He shook his head, a pantomime of pity. "My father is prepared, today, to offer you $500, in cash, for the land, all of it. The debt will be cleared, and you will walk away with a significant sum, enough to take your brother to a real doctor in the East. A fresh start." He laid the papers on the porch rail. $500. It was an impossible amount of money. It was more than the farm was worth, twice over. It was a trap. "No," Clara said. Jesse's smile wavered. "Miss Mason, be reasonable. This is not charity. It is business, the railroad survey." I said, "No, this farm is not for sale." Jesse looked past her, into the dimness of the house, at Thomas, who was watching from the doorway. He looked up at Eli, who had not moved. His gaze was pure venom. "I see," Jesse said, his voice losing its polish. He began to gather his papers. "You're making a mistake, a sentimental, foolish mistake." "I don't think so," Clara said. Jesse's face hardened. He was no longer the businessman. He was the man from the general store. "The note is due in 10 days. Miss Mason. 10 days. You have to haul that wheat, sell it, get the bank draft, and have it on my father's desk. 1 minute late, and I will be here with the sheriff."
I will have that land, and I will have you." He looked up at the roof. "And he will be gone." He turned, got into the buggy, and did not look back. The buggy disappeared in a cloud of its own dust. The air was heavy, the threat left hanging.
"He means it,"
Clara said to the roof. Eli's voice came down to her, low and rough.
"I know."
He climbed down, his face a grim mask. He did not touch her. He just picked up his tools and went to the barn to check the tacks on Shadow's saddle. He was checking his escape. Clara's heart ached. The hope, so new, was already bruised. That night, she could not sleep. She lay on her cot, listening to the crickets, listening to the sound of Eli's breathing on the porch. He was not asleep either. The air was thick, too still, too quiet. The smell came first, not the clean smell of wood smoke. This was acrid, sharp, the smell of oil. Eli was on his feet before she even sat up. "Fire!" he breathed. He was out the door in a second. Clara flew to the window. The eastern wall of the barn was a sheet of orange flame. "Thomas!" Clara screamed, running for her brother's cot. Thomas was already awake, his eyes wide with terror. "Clara!" Eli's voice was a roar from outside, not of panic, but of command.
"The wheat! It's the wheat!"
She grabbed Thomas's arm. "Get to the pump! Get in the trough! Hide! Do not move! Do you hear me? Thomas, do not move!" The boy, terrified, scrambled out the door. Clara ran after him, and the heat hit her like a solid wall. The fire was already on the barn roof, leaping high, sparks raining down on the dry yard. Eli was not trying to save the barn. He was trying to save the harvest. He was a demon, silhouetted against the flames. He had ripped the barn's smaller side door from its hinges. He was throwing himself into the smoke, emerging seconds later with a heavy sack of wheat, flinging it into the safety of the dark field, and going back in.
"Eli!"
she screamed.
"It's too—"
"The water!" he roared back, his voice hoarse. "Wet the sacks! The ones outside!" She ran to the pump, her hands raw, filling bucket after bucket. Thomas was huddled by the trough, crying. She threw water on the sacks stacked against the wall, but the fire was too hot. The canvas was already smoldering. "It's no use!" she cried. "Get back!" Eli yelled. He staggered out of the barn, another sack on his shoulder. His shirt was smoking. A new sound joined the roar of the fire, the whinny of a terrified horse. "Shadow!" Eli's head snapped toward the main barn doors, where smoke was pouring from the top. "No!" He dropped the wheat and ran for the main doors. "Eli, don't! It's too late!" He unlatched the heavy bar. The doors burst open, a new rush of oxygen feeding the inferno. A wave of flame and smoke billowed out. Then she saw him, a man on fire, leading a horse that was just as panicked. He had ripped his own burning shirt off and tied it around Shadow's head, blinding him, and was dragging the horse by the bridle. "Clara!" Thomas screamed. Clara turned. Her brother was no longer by the pump. He had run toward the burning barn, toward Eli. "Thomas, no!" The boy, in his nightshirt, had grabbed a small, half-empty sack of feed, trying to drag it, trying to help. He was too close. The wind shifted. The barn roof, weakened by the flames, groaned. A heavy, burning crossbeam, its support gone, cracked and fell outward. It struck the ground in a shower of embers, a wall of fire, cutting Thomas off. The boy screamed, his nightshirt catching, a dozen small, terrible flames. Eli was there. He had let Shadow go, slapping his rump to send him into the night. He moved faster than she had ever seen a man move. He was not a farmer. He was not a drifter. He was the scout. He was the ghost. He crossed the 20 feet in 3 bounds, tackling Thomas, wrapping his own bare-skinned body around the boy. He hit the ground and rolled, using his own flesh to smother the flames, rolling him over and over in the dust, roaring, a sound of agony and rage. He rolled until the flames were out. Clara was there, her knees giving way, her hands grabbing at her brother. Eli stood up, his body slick with sweat and soot, his chest and arms a map of red. Angry burns. He looked at the barn, now a complete, roaring inferno. He looked at the field, where perhaps a quarter of the harvest, maybe less, lay safe. The rest was gone. He looked at Thomas, who was sobbing in Clara's arms, his hands and his legs badly burned. Eli walked, stiff-legged, to the pump, and began to work the handle, letting the cool water run over his own blistered skin. He did not make a sound. The sheriff arrived just after dawn. He was not alone. Mr. Croft was with him, as was his son. Jesse's face was a mask of pale, civic concern. A small crowd of neighbors, drawn by the smoke, stood at a distance. Mrs. Gable was among them, her face grim. They found Clara on the porch, wrapping the last of her linens, torn into bandages, around Thomas's legs. Eli was standing by the pump, his back to them, his shoulders rigid. His skin was already blistering. "Miss Mason," Sheriff Brody said, removing his hat. He was a portly man, and he looked unhappy. "This is a terrible thing, terrible."
"It was Jesse,"
Clara said, her voice dead, her eyes on her brother's pained face.
"He did this."
Jesse gasped, a theatrical sound. "Clara, how can you? I was in my bed. My father—" "Sheriff," Mr. Croft said, his voice a cold, hard stone. "My son was with me all night. This is an accusation born of grief, hysteria."
"Then who?"
Clara demanded, standing up.
"Who else knew the harvest was my only chance? Who else warned me he'd be here with you?"
Sheriff Brody looked uncomfortable. He looked at the smoldering ruins of the barn. He looked at the small pile of saved wheat. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, clearing his throat, "there are other concerns." He walked over to Eli, who had not turned. "Mister, I'm going to need your name." Eli turned. Slowly. His face was black with soot. His dark eyes were bottomless.
"Eli."
"Just Eli." The sheriff sighed. He had been afraid of this. "Son, I sent a wire to the marshal in Hayes after the trouble at the general store. Just to check. Seems a man fitting your description. Going by Eli. Was run out of Dodge 2 months back. Suspicion of arson. A fire at a livery. Before that, a fight in Wichita. A man was badly hurt." Clara felt the blood drain from her face.
"No."
"Now, they never proved anything," the sheriff continued, his eyes on Eli. "But it's a pattern. Son, you show up, trouble follows, fire follows."
"He didn't do this!"
Clara was on her feet, running to Eli's side.
"He saved my brother. Look at him. He's burned. He was saving the wheat. He pulled his own horse from that fire."
"Or he said it, ma'am," Jesse said, his voice soft and reasonable, "and was caught. Tried to cover his tracks. A man like that. A drifter. He gets a taste of a soft bed, food on the table. He doesn't want to leave. Maybe he figured if the harvest was gone, you'd need him more. You'd be all alone, dependent." The logic was twisted, but it was logic. The crowd murmured. It made sense. A desperate woman, a rootless man.
"That is a lie," Clara screamed.
"Eli," the sheriff said, ignoring her, "what do you say for yourself?" Eli looked at the sheriff. He looked at Mr. Croft and at Jesse. He looked at the neighbors, their faces closed, suspicious, already convinced. He saw Mrs. Gable whisper to her friend, who nodded. He saw the world he knew, the world that had no place for him. He had seen this before, a courtroom, a hanging tree, the cold justice of men who had beds to sleep in. He turned his head and looked at Clara. His eyes were full of a terrible, deep sadness.
and he said nothing. "Eli, say something," Clara begged, grabbing his arm. "Tell them! Tell them you were here! Tell them about Jesse!" He just shook his head. Once, a small, tired movement. He would not fight this. He would not use words. His words were nothing. If he fought, he would fight like he had in the store. And that, he knew, would be the end of him. That would be the proof they all needed. "Sheriff," Eli said, his voice a low rasp. It's a mess. I'll be moving on. I'll get my horse." He was giving up. He was letting them win. "No," Clara's voice cracked. "You will not. You are not leaving. Sheriff, you arrest him." She pointed a shaking, soot-covered finger at Jesse. "Or I swear, I will."
"Clara, that's enough," the sheriff said, his voice hardening. "The man's confessed his intent to leave. That's good enough for me. We have no proof, just a lot of smoke." He put his hat back on. "Mr. Croft, I'm sorry for your trouble. Ma'am, I'm sorry for your barn. I'll post a watch tonight, in case the fire flares up." He was walking away. They were all walking away. "Mr." Croft put a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. The neighbors began to disperse, casting backward glances at the monster on the porch. They were alone. Clara, Thomas, who was now weeping silently, and Eli. The silence that fell was worse than the fire.
"Why?"
Clara finally whispered, her back to him. "Why did you let him? Why did you let them do that?" She turned. He was looking at his own blistered hands. "They were right," he said.
"That's not true. You didn't—"
"No," he said, looking up, his eyes meeting hers. The pain in them was a physical thing. "They were right. I show up, and fire follows. I am what they say I am. A drifter. A man who brings trouble. I brought the war. Clara, I brought it here. To your land. To your brother."
"You saved him!" she cried, her hands fisted at her sides. "You saved me! We can fight this! We have some of the wheat. It's enough. We can pay the debt and we'll rebuild."
"They will not let you," he said, his voice flat. "They will never let you. Not while I am here. I am the excuse. I am the arsonist. I am the vagrant. As long as I'm on this farm, you are tainted. You are the woman who lives with the barn burner. They will never let you be. You will never have peace."
"I don't care about them,"
she begged, moving to him, grabbing the front of his ruined, sooty pants.
"I don't care about the town. I care about you. Stay. Stay and fight with me. Don't leave me."
He looked down at her, and his face, for a second, broke. The mask of the ghost, the soldier, was gone. It was just Eli. His Eli. He reached out and touched her face, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw, leaving a black smudge. "I won't bring war to your land. Clara," he whispered, "I've seen what it does. I've seen—" He stopped. He thought of his brother. He thought of the mud. "I won't do it. I won't be the man who burns your life to the ground. He already set the fire. I won't be the one who stays to let it spread." He pulled her to him, his burned arms wrapping around her, and he held her. He held her as she sobbed into his chest, a desperate, tearing sound. He held her for a long time, just rocking, his own eyes closed, his face a mask of agony. She fell asleep from pure, raw exhaustion, curled on her cot, her bandaged brother sleeping beside her. Eli sat on the porch all night, his back to the wall, watching the ruins of the barn smolder. He was a man carved from shadow. When the first gray hint of dawn touched the sky, he stood. His body ached. His skin was on fire. He walked to his horse, Shadow, who was tied to the fence, his coat singed. He checked his saddle. Then he stopped. He looked at the house. He walked back to the porch. He unbuckled his saddlebag. It was old, worn, and contained everything he owned. He set it gently on the porch, by the door. He found a piece of charcoal from the fire. He ripped a corner from an old feed sack. He wrote, his letters stiff and clumsy, 2 words. He tucked the note into the strap of the saddlebag. He looked at the door. He wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, more than water, more than life, to go inside, to pick her up, and to run. Instead, he turned. He walked to his horse. He put his foot in the stirrup, and without a backward glance, he rode east into the rising sun, leaving the smoke and the harvest and his heart behind. Clara woke to a silence that was absolute. The sun was high. Her body ached. "Eli?" she whispered. She sat up. Thomas was sleeping. She ran to the porch. It was empty. The yard was empty. The road was empty. He was gone. She saw it then. The saddlebag. She fell to her knees, her hand reaching for it, as if it were him. She saw the note. She pulled it free. "You deserve peace." She did not scream. She did not cry. A cold, empty void opened up inside her. He had left her. He had let them win. He had chosen to be the ghost. She fell, not to the floor, but into herself, into a despair so black and final she thought it would swallow her. The next few days were a blur. The neighbors, who had at least been watching from a distance, now turned their backs. When she rode the wagon, Bess pulling, slowly, into town to buy more bandages. Mrs. Gable saw her and physically pulled her child inside, slamming the door. The farm was a ruin. The harvest was a handful of singed bags. Her brother was in pain, and Eli was gone. On the 3rd day, the buggy returned. Jesse Croft, this time he was alone. He found her in the field, staring at the spot where Eli had stood and fought the fire. "Clara," he said, his voice soft, full of pity. She did not turn. I am here to offer my condolences, and a solution." He was standing beside her now. He smelled of bay rum and money. "He is gone, Clara, the drifter. He did what men like that do. He ran. He left you with this." He gestured to the burned-out barn, to the sick boy on the porch. "I am a forgiving man," he said. He pulled a letter from his breast pocket. It was on thick, cream-colored paper. "My father is a hard man, but I have a heart." He held the letter out to her. "This is a proposal of marriage." Clara turned, her face so stunned she could not even form a word. "Marry me," he said, his eyes gleaming. He was not pitying. He was hungry. "Marry me, and I will make this all go away. I will tell my father to cancel the debt. I will rebuild your barn. I will rescue you, Clara. I will make you a respectable woman again. No one will dare call you spoiled. You will be Mrs. Jesse Croft." He thought he was offering her the world. He thought he was her savior. He stepped closer. "Say yes, Clara. It is your only, The sound of the slap was as sharp and clean as a gunshot in the still air. It echoed across the field. Jesse stumbled back, his hand to his face, a bright red mark blooming on his pale skin. His eyes were wide, first with shock, then with pure, unadulterable rage. Clara did not say a word. She looked at him, her eyes as cold and dead as ash. He dropped the letter in his shock. He sputtered, You slut! You will beg!" He was still talking when she bent, slowly, and picked up the letter. She did not look at it. She looked at him. Then she turned her back on him. She walked, not to the house, but to the center of the field, to the very spot where Eli's axe had split the wood, to the spot where he had stood shirtless in the sun. She pulled a match from her apron pocket. She had been meaning to light the stove. Jesse watched, his mouth open. What are you doing?" She struck the match on the heel of her boot. She lit the corner of the thick, cream-colored paper. She held it as it burned, The proposal, the rescue, the respectable life. She held it until the flame licked her fingers. Then she let the black, curling ashes fall, scattering in the wind, disappearing into the dust that Eli had worked. She turned and walked back to the house, leaving Jesse Croft alone in the field. His face marked, his offer turned to ash. She did not look back. Weeks passed. The calendar pages, stained with soot and water, were not turned. Time was measured by the angle of the sun and the slow, agonizing healing of Thomas's skin. The farm was a graveyard. The black, skeletal ribs of the barn stood against the pale, autumn sky, a monument to their ruin. Clara moved like a woman in a dream. The despair had not lifted. It had settled. A cold, heavy fog that muted all color, all sound, but the debt was still due. The 10 days Jesse Croft had given her were almost gone. There was only one thing to do. The harvest, what little Eli had saved, had to be sold. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough, but it was all she had. She and Thomas, his hands still wrapped in clean rags, his face tight with pain, loaded the wagon. They used Bess, the old mule, who seemed to sigh with every step. The work that Eli, with his broad shoulders and tireless strength, had made look easy, was a burning, back-breaking misery for them. It took them 2 days to load what he had saved in 30 minutes. The journey to town was silent. Thomas sat on the wagon bed, his legs hanging off the back. Clara walked beside Bess, holding the rein, her face hidden by the brim of her father's hat. The town watched them come. It was a spectacle. The burned woman, the burned boy, the singed sacks of wheat. Mrs. Gable saw them from the window of the general store and pulled the shade down. Clara did not go to the bank. She went to the feed and grain mill. Mr. Henderson, the man who had first reported Eli's presence, came out, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked at the meager, fire-damaged load. He looked at Clara's dead eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice not unkind, but not kind either. It was the voice of business. It's a loss. What happened? A terrible thing. I need to sell this, Mr. Henderson, today," he sighed, pulling a handful of grain from a sack that was not too badly scorched. He rubbed it in his palm. "It's damaged. Clara, smoke, water. I can't give you full price." "What is the price?" "I can give 40 cents a bushel. And that's me being a neighbor." It was robbery. It should have been twice that, but she had no choice. She nodded. "Cash. I need it in cash." "I'll give you a bank draft. It's safer." "No. Cash." She would not set foot in that bank until she had the money in her hand. He looked at her, saw the iron in her spine, and relented. He and his men unloaded the wagon. It took an hour. The sum was less than she had dared to hope. It was $412. The debt was $500. She was short. She was almost $90 short. She stood by the wagon, the small canvas bag of money in her hand. She had failed. After all this, after the fire, the blood, the burns, she had failed. "Ma'am?" "Mr. Henderson said. She turned and walked, not to the farm, but to the bank. Thomas, seeing her face, said nothing, just sat in the empty wagon, a lonely sentinel. Clara walked into the cool, dark space of the bank. Mr. Croft was at his desk. He did not smile. "Miss Mason, you are late." "The note is not due until sundown," she said, her voice a rasp. She walked to the desk. She opened her bag and poured the coins and bills onto his polished desk. It was a desperate, pitiful pile. "This is $412, she said. Mr. Croft did not look at the money. He looked at her. "The debt is $500. You are $88 short." "I know." "Then this is not payment. This is a deposit. The foreclosure will proceed." Clara put her hands on his desk.
She leaned forward. Her face was streaked with soot that would not wash out. Her hair was wild. She looked, he thought, like a mad woman. "You will take this money," she whispered, her voice so low and full of quiet rage that he leaned back. "You will take it, and then you will go to your vault. You will find the box that holds my mother's silver. The silver you took as collateral when my father took his last loan. The silver is worth more than $100. You will take that silver. You will sell it. You will pay the remainder of the note, and you will give me the receipt. Now." He stared at her. He had expected tears, begging. He had not expected this. This was not the girl he had known. This was someone else. "That is highly irregular. Miss Mason." "Do it," she said. "Or I will go to the sheriff, and I will tell him not about the fire. I will tell him about the irregular interest you have been charging on your father's personal loans. I will tell him about the widows who have lost their farms. I will scream it in the middle of the street. I have nothing left to lose. Mr. Croft, you took it all." Jessie, she realized, had gotten his cruelty from this man, but not his strength. Mr. Croft was silent for a full minute. His face was pale. He looked at the money. He looked at the mad, filthy, beautiful woman in front of him. He stood up. "Wait here." He was gone for 10 minutes. When he returned, he held a piece of paper. He pushed it across the desk. It was a receipt, paid in full. He had not used the silver. He had just caved. He was afraid of her. Clara took the paper. She did not say thank you. She folded it, put it in her pocket, turned, and walked out. She had won. The farm was hers. She got back on the wagon. Thomas looked at her, a question in his eyes. She just nodded. They rode home. She looked at the receipt. Paid. But the barn was still a ruin. The harvest was gone. The money was gone. Winter was coming, and Eli was gone. She was alone. She had never, in her entire life, been so completely and utterly alone. Eli, meanwhile, was trying to disappear. He had ridden east, not because he was going anywhere, but because he was running. His burns were a torment, his skin tight and weeping. He rode Shadow until the horse was exhausted, and then he sold him. He sold the finest horse he had ever known for $20 and a bottle of whiskey he did not drink. He needed to be someone else. He was a man of fire, a man who brought war. He needed to be nothing. He drifted south into Indian territory. He found work where he could, but he was haunted. He was haunted by the smell of smoke, by the sound of Thomas's scream, and by the look in Clara's eyes as she begged him to stay. He had left to save her, but it felt, in his gut, exactly like Cold Harbor. He had heard her call his name, and he had hidden in the mud. He had run. He needed to burn the ghost out of him. He joined a cattle drive, heading north, up from Texas. It was hard, mindless work. The trail boss, a man named Gable, looked at his scarred face and blistered hands and hired him. He was not a cowboy, but he was strong, and he was silent. The other men, they were loud. They were young, full of cheap whiskey and cheap talk. They played cards, they sang, they talked endlessly of the women they had known and the women they planned to know. Eli kept to himself. He took the night watch. He stared into the fire, and he saw her face. They called him Ghost. He did not talk. He did not drink. He just worked. The end came in a dusty, one-street town in Kansas, not 50 miles from where she was. They were there to load the cattle onto the train. The drive was over. They had been paid. The men went straight to the saloon. Eli was just going to buy supplies and leave. But Gable, the trail boss, clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, Ghost, you earned a drink. One drink, on me." Eli did not know how to say no. He did not know how to be normal. He went. The saloon was a haze of smoke.
piano music, and the smell of stale beer. The men were already loud. Eli stood at the bar, his drink untouched. A fight broke out. It was not a real fight. It was noise. A young cowboy, full of himself, had cornered one of the saloon girls by the stairs. She was a tired-looking woman, with faded red hair and a dress that had seen better years. "Come on, Sadie," the cowboy, a man they called Dutch, slurred. "Just one dance. One. Upstairs. Dance." "Leave me be, Dutch," she said, trying to push him away. "I'm working." "You are working." He laughed, grabbing her wrist. "This is the work, and I'm paying." He threw a coin at her. "Look at you, all painted up. You're just like all the rest, spoiled goods, just waiting." Eli did not hear the rest. He did not hear the piano. He did not hear the laughter. He did not see the trail boss. He only heard that word. Spoiled goods. He was not the ghost. He was not the scout. He was the fire. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not speak. He did not warn. Dutch turned, his mouth open to laugh, and Eli's fist, the scarred one, hit him. It was not a punch. It was a blow, a piece of machinery. It broke Dutch's nose. The man fell back. Eli was on him. He grabbed the front of his shirt, the same way he had grabbed Jesse. He pulled him up. He hit him again. The man's head snapped back, hitting the wall. Eli raised his fist again. The saloon was dead silent. And he saw her. He saw Clara, begging him, Don't leave me." He looked at the terrified, bloody face of the man in his grasp. He looked at his own hand, raised to strike. He was shaking. The violence, it was in him. It was a poison. He let go. Dutch slumped to the floor, unconscious. The saloon girl, Sadie, was staring at him, her hand over her mouth. Eli stood up, breathing hard. He looked at his own bloody knuckles. Gable, the trail boss, was at his side. "Son," he said, his voice low, "you're done. Get your pay and get out. You're not right." Eli nodded. He was not right. He was a monster. He had run from the war, but the war had never, ever left him. He took his pay and walked out. He did not buy supplies. He walked out of the town. He walked south. He was done running from the violence. He had to go and face the man who had started it. He had to go and face himself. He walked for 3 days before he bought a mule. He rode south, back to Tennessee, back to the place it had all begun. The journey took him 3 weeks. He was thin, his eyes burned in their sockets. He did not sleep. He just rode. He found the town. It was green, healed over. The scars of the battle were still there, the shell-pocked trees, the old trenches, now just soft ditches. He found the graveyard. It was a sea of white stones. He did not know where his brother was. He had died in the mud, in the place they called the hornet's nest. Eli walked. He walked until his legs were numb. He found a stone, no different from the others. Silas M. It was not his brother. His brother's name was David, but it would do. He sat in the grass, in the quiet, and he talked. "I'm sorry, David," he whispered. His voice was a rusty, unused thing. "I'm sorry, I didn't move. I heard you. I was a coward. I know it. I've been running. I've been running from that day. I've been playing dead. For 15 years. He looked at the stone. "I met a woman. Her name is Clara. She has your eyes. Not the color. The fight. She's got a farm. She was in trouble. And I ran again. David, I ran. I thought I was protecting her. But I left her. I left her in the mud. Just like I left you." He was weeping, the dry, silent sobs of a man who had not cried in a decade. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I'm so tired of being the ghost." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the small, tarnished piece of brass, a medal, for valor. They had given it to him for a report he'd made, for a map he'd drawn. It was a lie. He dug a small hole in the soft earth at the foot of the grave. He placed the medal in it. He covered it. He buried the scout. He buried the ghost. He sat until the sun went down. He felt empty, but it was not the cold void of despair. It was just empty, clean. He was not the ghost. He was not the soldier. He was Eli. And Eli had left his heart in Kansas. Back on the farm, the cold was setting in. Clara and Thomas had worked. They had salvaged the burned timbers of the barn, building a small, three-sided lean-to. It was a miserable shelter, but it kept the wind off Bess. Thomas was better. His hands were scarred, the skin pink and tight, but he was using them. He was quiet, but he was watching her. Clara was a ghost. She worked, she cooked, she mended, but she was not there. Her soul was somewhere on the road, riding east. One night, Thomas spoke. They were sitting by the fire, the wind howling outside. "He's not coming back, is he, Clara?" Clara stopped stirring the thin soup. She stared into the fire. "No, Thomas, he's not." "He was a good man," Thomas said, his voice small, but sure. Clara's head snapped up. He ran, Thomas. He left us." "No," Thomas said, his eyes meeting hers. They were clear, and they were full of a 14-year-old's simple, profound truth. "He didn't run. They made him go. Jesse, the sheriff. All of them." He looked down at his own scarred hands. "He got these, pulling me, from the fire. He sat with me when the fever was bad. I remember. He told me stories about his horse. He was nice." He looked back at his sister. He was the only one who stayed when he didn't have to. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Gable, they only come to take or to laugh. He stayed. He worked. He saved us. Clara stared at her brother. He was right. She had been so lost in her own grief, in her own sense of betrayal, that she had forgotten. He had not abandoned her. He had sacrificed himself. He had seen himself as the war, the fire, the poison, and he had cut himself out to save the land. That night, she did not sleep. She looked at the thing in the corner, the thing she had been unable to touch, Eli's saddlebag. She had left it. It was his. It was a tomb. She was afraid of what was inside, or what was not. Her hands trembled. She walked to it. She knelt. She touched the worn leather. It was smooth. It still smelled faintly of him, of dust and horse and faint, clean sweat. She unbuckled the strap. She pulled it open. There was not much. A worn whetstone, a tin cup, a single tarnished cartridge, a small, folded piece of oilcloth. Her heart was hammering. She opened the oilcloth. 2 things. The first was a flower, a dried, pressed prairie flower, a bluebonnet, one she had picked from the field by the creek and tucked behind her ear one afternoon. Thinking he was not looking, he had seen, he had kept it. The second, it was a sketch on the back of an old, folded map of Kansas. It was charcoal, smudged and rough. It was her. She was standing by the fence, her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled up. But the artist had seen something she had never seen. The woman in the sketch was not tired. She was not tainted. Her head was high. Her eyes were looking at the horizon. And she was smiling. A small, sure, secret smile. He had drawn her beautiful. He had drawn her strong. The dam broke, the cold fog, the despair, the emptiness. It all shattered. She did not cry. She wept. She held the sketch to her chest, her body bowing over. A single, tearing sound ripped from her throat. She cried for him, for the man who carried so much pain. He could not see his own goodness, for the man who had looked at her, a ruined woman on a ruined farm, and seen this. He was wrong. He was not the fire. He was not the war. He was the harvest. She cried until she was empty, and then she was filled. Not with hope, with certainty. She stood. She wiped her face, leaving a charcoal smudge from the sketch. She walked to the trunk at the foot of her bed. She pulled out her father's heavy wool coat. She pulled out her savings, the $1.30 left from the grain sale. She went to Thomas. He was asleep. She kissed his forehead.
She went to the shed. She saddled Bess. The mule was old, but she was steady.
She packed the saddlebag, his saddlebag. She put the sketch back inside, carefully. She packed the last of the bread and her father's knife. Thomas came to the door, rubbing the sleep from his eyes.
"Clara, where are you going?"
She swung up onto the mule. The wind was cold. It was coming from the north. Winter was here. She looked at her brother, her face illuminated by the moonlight. She was the woman in the sketch.
"He's out there. Thomas, he's lost."
"Where are you going?"
"West,"
she said. She had no idea. The map was of Kansas. He had left it. He had left her a clue. He was not a drifter. He had a past. He had a place. West. "I'm coming with you."
"No,"
she said, her voice gentle, but made of iron. "You stay. You keep the farm. You keep the fire lit. Thomas, you are the man of the house now. You hold it until I come back."
"Will you?"
"I will," she said. Or we will." She turned Bess. She did not look back at the ruin of her farm, at the small boy in the doorway. She looked west, at the endless dark and frozen prairie, and she rode. The journey west was a new kind of war. Clara had thought she knew hardship. She had thought the drought, the fever, and the fire were the worst the world could do. She had been wrong. Winter fell on the plains like a hammer. She had the $1.30, her father's coat, and a mule that was already tired. She rode Bess until the first snow, and then she walked, leading the mule. She had no map, only the tattered charcoal sketch of herself, a pressed bluebonnet, and the word West. She followed the trail of men moving toward the mountains, toward the promise of gold, or silver, or just away. She learned to ask questions, not of Eli, but of a ghost. "Have you seen a man quiet, with a scar?" she would ask at a trading post, her voice raw from the cold. "He's a hard worker, calls himself Eli, or maybe just Ghost." Some would laugh, some would pity her. Most just shook their heads. She ran out of money in a small nameless town in western Kansas, a place of mud and raw-planked buildings. She sold Bess to a liveryman for $10, her hands stroking the mule's soft, gray nose. "I'm sorry, old girl," she whispered, her tears freezing on her face. "You were the last." She used the money for food, not for shelter. She slept in barns, offering to muck out stalls in exchange for a bed in the hay. She washed dishes in a saloon, the men's eyes on her, until the owner's wife, a hard-faced woman with kind eyes, gave her a plate of stew and told her to keep moving. "This is no place for you, child," she had said. "Whatever you're looking for, it ain't here." She walked. Her boots, worn thin, were stuffed with grass and rags. She was gaunt, her hair hacked short with her father's knife because it had frozen to the ground one night. She was no longer the woman from the farm. She was something else, something harder, something forged in the wind. In eastern Colorado, she heard a rumor. A rancher, a Mr. Pearsall, had taken on a hand for the winter. A strange man, didn't talk, worked himself to the bone for just board and $1 a week. "Man looks haunted," the blacksmith told her, not looking up from his anvil. "Got a face like he lost a fight with a mountain cat. They call him the Gee Ghost. He's up at the Cross Creek Ranch. If he's still there." Clara bought a piece of hardtack with her last 5 cents and turned north, toward the mountains. The Cross Creek Ranch was just a collection of low, sod-roofed buildings huddled in a ravine, trying to hide from the wind. It was late February. The snow was thin, but the air was so cold it cut the breath from her lungs. She walked for 2 miles, following the creek, and then she saw him. He was in a field, a vast brown expanse under a pale, unforgiving sky. He was not near the buildings. He was alone, mending a fence line that seemed to stretch to the end of the world. He was thinner. She could see his ribs through the threadbare, borrowed shirt. His hair was long, wild. He moved with a familiar, slow deliberation, his body stiff from the cold. He was setting a new post, tamping the earth down with a heavy log. He looked broken, a man worn down to just bone and will. He was bruised. A dark, purple mark covered one side of his face, as if from a recent, brutal fight. But he was alive. Clara stopped at the edge of the field, her heart a heavy, painful drum against her ribs. She was afraid. What if he turned her away? What if the man who had buried his ghosts in Tennessee was not the same man who had left her? What if he saw her and ran again? She could not call his name. The word would not come. So she did what she had always done. She went to work. She tucked his saddlebag, her saddlebag, now closer to her. She climbed over the fence, her legs shaking so hard she almost fell. The snow crunched under her boots. He did not hear her. He was lost in the rhythm of his work. Thud, thud, thud. She walked past him, not looking at his face. She went to the pile of tools and wire he had left by the last post. Her hands, raw and cracked, fumbled with the cold metal. She picked up a coil of wire. She grabbed the wire stretchers. She walked to the post he had just set. She began to string the wire. Her hands were clumsy. She was weak. The wire bit into her skin, but she held it. He stopped. The thud was gone. The world was silent, except for the high, thin shriek of the wind. He had not seen her. He had felt her. He had felt the shift in the air. He had felt the presence of another. He turned. Slowly. He was holding the heavy log. His arms, though thin, were still corded with muscle. His eyes fell on her. Eli did not move. He stood, frozen, the log held in his hands. He was looking at a ghost. This was a vision, a trick of the cold, of the hunger, of the punch he'd taken in town 2 nights before. This was his guilt, finally come to claim him. This apparition was not the Clara he had left. This woman was terrifying. She was all eyes, huge and dark in a face made of angles. Her hair was a short, ragged cap. She was wearing his father's coat, which was 3 sizes too large, and her hands were bleeding onto the wire she was holding. But it was her. He dropped the log. It fell to the frozen earth with a dull sound. He took a step. "Clara?" His voice, it was the same, a low, rough rasp, like stones in a dry creek. She let the wire go. It sprang back, but she didn't notice. She just looked at him. She had come 200 miles. She had walked through winter, and here he was. She could not speak. She just looked at him. She poured all of it, the fire, the journey, the cold, the fear, and the love, all of it, into that one long look. He was the first to break. His face, the hard, scarred mask he showed the world, crumpled. He took a stumbling step toward her. "Clara, you shouldn't be." She was running. She crossed the 10 feet of frozen ground, and she did not just hug him, she threw herself at him. A small, desperate, furious force. Her arms went around his waist, her face pressing into the rough, cold fabric of his borrowed coat. She held on, her fingers digging into his back, as if she could drive her way into his very bones, and hold him there. He was stiff,
For a second, a man of stone, his arms at his sides. He was shaking. He could smell her hair, the scent of smoke, and cold, and her. "You don't have to finish alone," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. It was not a plea, it was not a memory, it was a command. And it broke him. The man who had survived Cold Harbor, the man who had faced down Jesse Croft, the man who had buried his ghosts in Tennessee. He broke. A sound was torn from his chest, a sound of such profound, racking grief that it scared her. His arms, his burned, scarred arms, came around her. He crushed her to him. He buried his face in her short, rough hair, and he wept. He was not the ghost. He was just Eli, and he was, for the first time in his life, found. They stood in the middle of that frozen field for a long time, the wind howling around them, the only two living things in a world of brown and gray. The ranch foreman found them like that. An hour later, he was a hard man, but not a cruel one. He looked at the haunted man he'd hired, who was now holding this ragged scrap of a woman as if she was the only thing holding the world together. He cleared his throat. "Ghost, you got family here?" Eli looked up, his face wrecked, his eyes clear. "She's my wife," he said, the word tasting strange and true. I'm done here, Mr. Pearsall." Pearsall nodded. He looked at Clara. "Ma'am, you look..." Half froze. He dug in his pocket and pulled out a single silver dollar. Eli's pay. He pressed it into Eli's hand. "Go on, get out of the cold." They left. They walked to the town, a mile away. The first thing they did was find the livery. Bess was there, thin but alive. Clara used the dollar to buy her back. They rode east. They rode on one mule, Clara in front, Eli's arms around her, his body a shield against the wind. They did not talk of the fire. They did not talk of the journey. They talked, as they huddled by a small fire made of buffalo chips, of the future. He told her of Tennessee, of the medal, of the name David. He told her he had finally stopped running. She told him about the receipt, about the land, that it was theirs. She pulled out the oilcloth. She showed him the sketch. "Who is this woman?" she asked, her voice soft. She's beautiful." He traced the line of the drawing with his rough finger. She's you. It's what I saw." "It's what will be," she said, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. Spring. They arrived back at the farm in late March. The land was a sea of mud, the air still cold. The ruined barn was a black, jagged mouth. Thomas was there. He was on the porch, splitting wood. He looked up, heard the bray of the mule. He saw them. He dropped the axe. He did not run to Clara. He ran to Eli. The boy, thin and scarred, threw his arms around Eli's waist, his face buried in the man's coat. "You came back," he sobbed. "You came back." Eli's hand, his scarred hand, rested on the boy's head. He looked over him, at Clara, his eyes full. "We came back," he said. There was no money, there was no barn, there was no seed. There was only the land, and the three of them. It was enough. They worked. They sold Eli's saddle, the last thing of value he owned, for seed. Not just wheat, corn, beans, potatoes. They would not be beholden to one crop, to one harvest. Eli and Thomas, they worked the ruins of the barn. They salvaged the good timber. They pulled the nails, straightening them one by one on a flat stone. They began to build, not a new barn, but a new house. The small sod-roofed house was too small, too full of ghosts. They built it on the ridge, where it could see the sun rise and set. Clara worked beside them, hauling stone, mixing mud for the chinking. Her hands, soft from the journey, grew hard again. They were a team. They were a family. As they built, the land came alive. The scarred earth, the field where the firebreak had been. It grew. The winter corn,
the potatoes, the beans. The land was forgiving. One evening, in late summer, they stood under the old cottonwood tree. It was the only big tree on the property, and the fire had licked its trunk. But it had survived. Clara was in a simple blue dress, one she had mended from her mother's trunk. Thomas stood beside Eli, his hair slicked down with water. The circuit preacher, a man who passed through once every 2 months, stood before them, his Bible open. "Do you, Eli, what is your surname, son?" Eli looked at Clara. He had no name. He was just Eli. "Mason," Clara said, her voice clear. She stepped closer and took his hand. "His name is Eli Mason." Eli's hand tightened on hers. He looked at her, his eyes shining. It was a small wedding. The only guests were the prairie wind and the setting sun, but it was full of light. A year passed. The new house was solid. The new barn, though small, was full. The fields were a sea of gold. The harvest was bigger than her father had ever seen. It was hot. The sun was a white-hot coin, but the wind was kind. Eli was in the field, his back to the house. He was shirtless. His body was no longer thin. It was a map of hard, strong muscle, brown from the sun. The scars, from the war, from the fire, were just part underscore of him. Pale lines on a landscape of strength. He was not a ghost. He was a farmer. Clara came out of the house, a bucket of water in her hand. Thomas was on the new wagon, stacking the sheaves. The boy's thin arms now muscled. Clara stopped and watched her husband. He swung the scythe, the rhythm of it a song. Swish, thud. She was full. Her body, her life. She was not the same woman. She was the woman from the sketch. She smiled. She set the water down. And, with a laugh that bubbled up from a place of pure joy, she scooped up a handful of wheat chaff. She ran up behind him. "Eli Mason," she called. He turned, wiping the sweat from his face, a smile already on his lips. She threw the chaff at him. It exploded in a cloud of gold, sticking to his damp skin, catching in his dark hair. He blinked, stunned, and then he laughed, a deep, real laugh that reached his eyes. "Woman, You missed a spot," she said, her eyes sparkling. She pointed to a patch of wheat. "You never did stop at halfway." He dropped the scythe. He stalked toward her, his eyes dark with a new kind of fire. "Oh, didn't I?" He pulled her in. His hands, calloused and strong, settled on her waist, pulling her flush against his hot, damp skin. She gasped, her hands on his shoulders. "I told you," she teased, her voice breathless. "You—" He kissed her. He kissed her slow and deep, under the hot sun, in the middle of their field. It was a kiss of promise, of arrival, of a life built, not found. He pulled back, just enough to rest his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. The golden chaff was in his hair, like a crown. "Not with you," he murmured. "Thank you for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with Clara and Eli. Where in the world are you listening from? I would love to know." Please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories like this one. And share your thoughts about this tale in the comments. I read every one.